Today on BRStv Reef FAQs, we answer, how do we prevent all that crud mixing up in our saltwater mixing bins? Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Reef FAQs. Today it's time to confront the crud, all that brown, crusty buildup that's been part of reefers' lives for decades, but just doesn't have to be. I'm pretty certain most reefers don't enjoy cleaning saltwater bins, and once it's disturbed, no one wants to dose a brown cloud to the tank with what was supposed to be a water change that cleans the tank. We have the top 3 super easy ways to prevent the buildup of crud anyone can implement, starting with number 3, filter it out. All these salts come from different sources of mined, evaporated, or purified synthetic salts, all have different levels of major elements, and some potentially have chelators, clays, and clarifiers, all of which can produce precipitate and brown organic crud in the storage tank walls, and even create a brown organic film or foam on the surface of the water, which is supposed to be clean water used for a water change. One of the easier ways to deal with this is just filter it out. The most common method being something like a BRS reactor with a 5-micron RO-Save.Z sediment filter. I strongly suggest that specific filter because it's a true depth filter with a vastly different graded density that you can feel with your hand, meaning it'll capture contaminants throughout its entire thickness and last a lot longer for this application. In most cases, a single few dollar filter will clean an entire bucket of salt. Combined with good mixing methods, this will keep your bin free of crud, virtually eliminate the need to clean it, and make sure none of that enters the tank. The second method of avoiding the crust is mix the salt properly to begin with. In many cases, what looks like a crusty precipitate in the storage container is a direct result from not thoroughly mixing the salt to begin with. That was something that we found in a BRStv Investigates with mixing 8 different salts for an hour with a power head, and then just pulling the plug. 6 of the 8 options had some pretty significant amounts of crusty buildup over the following weeks with just 20 gallons of water. Pretty easy to imagine the results from multiple buckets. However, when heated and continuously mixed in the same experiment, almost none of them had the precipitate or crust building up in the container, even when we later removed the pump and heater. So heating and properly mixing the salt had a direct impact on the reduction of crusty formations in the bin. In fact, we repeated the test again with just mixing for 24 hours in the ambient room temp water starting at 70 degrees, and all but a couple stayed thoroughly mixed. So in that case, heat was really only required for some salt options. The first thing I'll share with you is you should follow the instructions on the bucket. They're there for a reason, and the ones that ultimately did require heat had that listed on the bucket. That said, how much effort reefers put into mixing the salt varies pretty wildly, from pouring in the salt and giving it a quick spin with a spoon to vigorous mixing for days in a heated vessel. The answer lies somewhere in there, depending on the raw materials and formulation to make the specific salt. 48 hours of mixing in heated salt water probably being something close to best practice, but some requiring as little as an hour of thorough mixing to prevent crusty formations. I guess that kind of leads us to the number 3 way to prevent the brown crust in your bin, and maybe the most obvious or realistic: use a salt that doesn't have the brown stuff to begin with and mixes easy without the need for heat or prolonged mixing methods. Again, all these salts have different source materials and purification steps. In one of those experiments, we ran 20 gallons of the 8 different mixed salt waters through sediment filters, and you can see there's an obvious difference. Keep in mind, this is only 20 gallons. An entire bucket would be roughly 8 times that. That said, this is an area where you get what you pay for. The best performer in all these experiments was the most expensive with Tropic Marin's Pro Reef. The cost and the performance almost certainly related to the pharmaceutical grade materials used to make the salt. In the end, with a 100-gallon tank with 10% weekly water changes, the highest performing salts will cost about $5 or more a month, but to be frank, that's probably significantly cheaper than heaters, reactors, sediment filters, and power to run them to achieve a similar result. An interesting intermediary option to that, which balances performance on all the fronts that we tested, most notably easy mixing without precipitation, but comes at a mid-level price point, was the Brightwell Neomarine salt. Also worth noting, that's what the team at WWC uses predominantly on their display and grow-out systems. All these experiments were pretty interesting, particularly that one looking at the amount of precipitate from salts mixed for an hour, and then using the sediment filters to gauge all the brown contaminants in the salt. If you haven't seen it, check it out. In fact, that box down there is actually a shortcut to all our best salt videos found in the category headers of our site for easy reference. See you next Wednesday with the next batch of BRStv Reef FAQs.